Have you ever stopped to think, I mean, really think, about what it takes for an organization, especially one that works globally, one dedicated to care, to build and keep, profound trust?
It's a huge question.
Yeah, how do they guarantee safety and maintain, real accountability, especially for the most vulnerable people?
That's exactly it, isn't it? It goes right to the heart of what they do, their whole mission, their integrity. And today, well, we get to explore that very thing.
Absolutely. So welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're focusing on this really quite comprehensive document. It's the Congregational Policy for Safeguarding Minors and Vulnerable Adults. Came out in 2024 from the Congregation of Jesus, Mary, Joseph. And our mission, our goal here, is to really unpack it, to pull out not just the rules, but the surprising and really vital insights into how a big global religious group is systematically, tackling this incredibly critical issue, protecting vulnerable people.
And this whole deep dive, it's based directly on their official policy document. So it gives us a really clear framework, for how they actually handle safeguarding across all their different operations worldwide. It's quite a fascinating window into the actual mechanics they've set up.
Okay, so let's start right there at the source. The heart of this policy is the Congregation of Jesus, Mary, Joseph, JMJ they're often called, founded by Reverend Father Matthias Wolff, a Jesuit. And their core identity, what they call their charism, it's an ever-adaptable apostolic availability.
That phrase itself, ever adaptable, kind of hints at a dynamic approach, doesn't it?
It really does.
And that charism, well, it seems absolutely foundational. The JMJ sisters, they run these incredibly diverse ministries all over the world. I mean, everything from education, healthcare, social work, pastoral care, evangelization.
Oh, quite a range.
Yeah, and all of it is geared towards what they term integral human development and liberation. But what's really striking, I think, is how the policy stresses that safeguarding isn't just like an add-on.
Right, not just another program.
Exactly. They state it's an integral part of their vision and mission. And they connect this back, reflecting a commitment that apparently goes back centuries through their history.
A centuries-long commitment to adapting and serving, and now making safeguarding absolutely central. So, okay, what's the driving philosophy here? Why is safeguarding so fundamental for them?
Well, it seems rooted in this absolute belief in human dignity. The policy flat out states every human person possesses an infinite dignity, inalienably grounded in his or her very being. And they cite the Church's Dignitas Infinita document there.
So it's not just a nice idea.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's positioned as the absolute bedrock for every single guideline, every procedure that follows. It means, they see protection as an inherent right, not just some charitable act.
Okay. And what are the sort of guiding lights for this policy? Because it feels like they're pulling from a lot of different powerful sources to build this approach.
Oh, they absolutely are. The framework is incredibly comprehensive. They pull from the gospel, obviously, and various church documents. Pope Francis's Vos Estis Lux Mundi gets mentioned. That's the one urging concrete action against abuse, trying to restore credibility.
Right, I remember that one.
Then there's a whole tradition of Catholic social teachings, things like dignity of the human person, preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, solidarity, participation, those core ideas. And significantly, they also weave in international law. They specifically mention adhering to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
So it's this really broad scaffolding, faith-based, ethical, and legally informed on a global scale.
Exactly. Robust and holistic.
What's really insightful, too, is just how they visualize this commitment. Just looking at the cover of the policy, it tells a story. There's a globe, interconnected figures, and importantly, one figure clearly has a disability. That immediately signals, universal reach in this deep commitment to inclusivity.
Yeah, that imagery is powerful. And the Care and Dignity logo itself seems really thoughtfully designed. The C is for care, D is for dignity, JMJ, obviously, for the congregation.
Right.
Even the colors mean something. Pink for care, a sort of grayish blue for dignity, orange for positivity. It's more than just branding. It feels like a visual summary of their core values, making it accessible right away.
Okay, so we've got the big picture, the commitment, the philosophy, the guiding principles. Now, the policy links into something really essential, nailing down exactly who is considered vulnerable and what actually constitutes abuse. How do they make sure, no one slips through the cracks?
They're quite precise here. A minor or child, that's defined as anyone under 18. Or interestingly, anyone who habitually has imperfect use of reason, regardless of age.
Okay.
And a vulnerable adult is defined as anyone whose condition could be infirmity, a physical or mental deficiency, even deprivation of liberty, like being in prison limits their ability to understand or resist abuse. It's a very broad, very inclusive definition.
Which seems crucial for comprehensive protection.
Absolutely.
And then when they talk about abuse, they go, well, way beyond just the obvious physical stuff, which I think is really important. Can we unpack some of those definitions? Like, what counts as physical abuse or corporal punishment?
Right. So that's defined really clearly as any degrading punishment that uses physical force to cause pain. Doesn't matter how severe, if it uses force to cause pain and degrades, it's out.
Got it. And emotional abuse.
That covers the non-physical cruel behaviors, things that belittle, humiliate, threaten, or scare someone, the psychological harm.
Okay. And sexual abuse, you mentioned it covers direct acts, but also these more subtle non-contact forms, things that could maybe be overlooked.
Exactly. So it's any sexual activity a child or a vulnerable adult doesn't understand or consent to. That includes molestation, exploitation involving them in pornography. But, and this is quite insightful, the policy explicitly includes non-contact-based sexual offenses.
Like what?
Things like exposing genitalia, masturbating in front of someone, showing them pornography, or even just using sexually explicit language towards them. It really broadens that protective scope, recognizing harm isn't just about physical touch.
Well, yeah. Okay, now here's where I found it gets really interesting. Spiritual abuse. I have to admit, you don't often see that term defined so explicitly in policies, especially from a religious organization itself. What does that mean here? Why flag it up?
It's a profoundly nuanced definition, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it shows a deep understanding of the unique vulnerabilities that can exist within a spiritual context. Spiritual abuse, as they define it, is about exerting control over someone using religion, faith, beliefs, often by manipulating them, maybe presenting oneself as like the voice of God. The specific harm they highlight is damage to the person's own relationship with God, blurring those lines between, divine will and the abuser's manipulation.
That makes sense. It's a specific kind of power dynamic.
Exactly. And it's critical for a faith-based group to tackle this head-on because it's an abuse of the very trust inherent in their spiritual mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there's abuse of conscience. That sounds incredibly insidious.
It does. It's described as the malice involved in manipulating someone's conscience to the point where they can't distinguish moral good from evil anymore, basically crippling their moral compass.
Wow.
And then, of course, the more broadly recognized abuse of power, just misusing authority to control, influence, manipulate, or harm people.
The policy also talks about grooming. Now, that's a term we hear more often these days, thankfully. How does the policy define it? And maybe more importantly, how does it help people spot those subtle signs early?
Right. Grooming is explained as a kind of seductive behavior. It's designed to build this special bond, a feeling of trust, and maybe even indebtedness, often through giving special privileges, gifts, lots of attention.
Setting the stage.
Exactly. Chillingly, the goal is to set the stage for future abuse. So while the policy defines it, the real challenge it flags up for everyone involved is recognizing these behaviors for what they are. Not seeing them as just kindness, but potentially as a precursor to harm. It really pushes for vigilance, for awareness, moving beyond just reacting to abuse to actually preventing it by spotting these early signs.
Makes sense. And one last term that really seems to pinpoint a systemic risk, hierarchicalism. What's that about for them? What risks does it address?
Hierarchicalism.
Right.
They define that as an exclusive power culture within the hierarchy itself, one that can foster impunity, a profound lack of accountability, and potentially lead to cover-ups.
So by naming it.
By naming it, yeah, the policy acknowledges this critical internal risk factor, a dynamic that can actually obstruct justice and allow abuse to continue. It signals they're aware of these institutional dynamics and that they need to be actively fought against.
Okay, so with all these really clear, comprehensive definitions laid out, how does the JMJ congregation then proactively try to build this culture of protection? What are the actual tangible safeguards they put in place to stop abuse happening?
Well, a key piece is the Safeguarding Commission, the CSC. This acts as the main advisory board to the top congregational leadership team.
Right.
And what's particularly significant here, and maybe a crucial step for a religious order, is the mandatory inclusion of at least one Catholic layperson on this commission.
Ah, that's interesting, bringing in an outside perspective.
Exactly. It suggests a deliberate move towards, external accountability, bringing in diverse expertise beyond just the internal clerical structures.
The inclusion of lay people definitely feels strategic. What other kinds of expertise are on this commission? Is it diverse?
Oh, yeah, it's quite comprehensive. You've got the safeguarding coordinator, then experts in civil law, canon law, education, social work, psychology, medicine, even media, and moral theology. A real mix.
So covering all the bases.
Trying to, yeah. And the criteria for members are strict. They have to be passionate about it, willing to be trained, take an oath of confidentiality, be accountable, and critically, be completely free of any human or child rights violations or convictions themselves. Ensures both knowledge and ethical integrity.
Okay, so that's the Central Commission. But how does this filter down? How do they ensure a safe environment at the local level, where the ministries are actually interacting with people daily?
Right. Good question. Each unit, that's their term for local or regional structures, is responsible for setting up its own local safeguarding commission. They also have to implement procedures for whistleblowing and handling complaints and manage IT and social media use responsibly.
So decentralizing it.
Yes. And crucially, every single unit has to have a dedicated safeguarding office. And that office needs 2 legally appointed persons, one of whom must be a lay associate. Again, that lay involvement at the local level. It makes safeguarding directly accessible right where it's most needed.
And what about bringing new people into the organization, into the congregation itself or their ministries? Sounds like they have a pretty robust vetting process.
Oh, it's incredibly rigorous.
Yeah.
There's an extensive vetting process for literally all personnel.
Right.
That includes potential future members, they call them aspirants, and any associates working with them.
What does that involve?
Detailed job ads and descriptions, clearly outlining responsibilities, multiple interviews, self-declarations about their history, certificates of clearance like police checks, psychological tests if deemed necessary, and checking at least 2 references thoroughly. And it doesn't stop there. It emphasizes thorough induction training, making sure everyone signs acceptance forms that explicitly state their commitment to safeguarding, and having probationary periods for all new personnel. It's like a proactive filtering system, trying to minimize risk right from the very start.
So it's not just about who they bring in, but also how they train and form them once they're part of the community, right? What does that ongoing formation involve?
Precisely. That's key. There's a huge focus on what they call human formation. This covers physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual integrity. They aim to train members to think critically, speak assertively, act justly, basically, to cultivate this culture of care and respect in their everyday lives.
How do they do that?
Well, it includes specific formation in things like critical judgment, boundary settings, and psychosexual and affective maturity. It's about instilling a proactive, protective mindset that influences every interaction, not just, ticking a box on a one-off training day.
And it sounds like this isn't just an internal thing either. They seem keen to actively involve the wider community in these efforts.
Yes, absolutely. The policy really emphasizes participatory, inclusive engagement with all stakeholders. That means children themselves, parents, the lay faithful, volunteers, everyone.
How does that work practically?
Well, the units are required to communicate the policy really widely. They need to involve stakeholders in carrying out risk assessments for their specific contexts. And they have to develop materials that are child-friendly and also user-friendly for vulnerable adults, ensuring everything is accessible and people can genuinely participate. It shows this holistic understanding. Safeguarding isn't just an internal rule book. It's a shared community responsibility.
Okay, right. So they've got all these proactive safeguards, the structures, the training, the community engagement. But what happens when, despite all that, an allegation of abuse actually comes forward? How does the policy say they must respond? What are the procedures?
The policy is exceptionally clear on this. The directive is to take seriously and act upon all allegations, suspicions, and concerns of abuse immediately. Doesn't matter if it's about something happening now or something from the past.
Immediately.
Immediately. And their stated first obligation is unequivocally the victim's healing.
Victim first.
Absolutely. This means proactively reaching out to victims and their families, offering this comprehensive support, spiritual, physical, emotional, medical, therapeutic assistance, whatever is needed.
That's crucial.
And, importantly, they emphasize protecting the privacy of victims and complainants. But, and this is a really significant point, they explicitly state that victims and survivors are not required to maintain confidentiality about their experience or the reporting process.
Wow, okay. That feels like a big shift, empowering the victim.
It does. It prioritizes the victim's agency and well-being above, say, institutional reputation.
So that protection and freedom from confidentiality are huge. How does the reporting process itself actually work then? It sounded like there are multiple ways to report.
Yeah, it's designed as a multi-layered system. The idea is to ensure every single report gets heard and acted upon. Basically, it sets up clear paths for reporting, both within the congregation structure, going from the local unit level right up to the Vatican if necessary, and, crucially, reporting to external civil authorities whenever that's legally required.
Okay.
So, for example, any member is obliged to report sexual abuse by another congregation member or associate straight to their province coordinator. That coordinator then has the duty to inform civil authorities if it's mandatory reporting territory.
And if the allegation involves someone outside the congregation, like a diocesan priest?
Then the report goes to the local ordinary, the bishop. And the process involves preliminary investigations to see if there's what they call a semblance of truth. If there is, then external investigators are brought in.
External investigators, another layer of independence.
Exactly. Adds credibility and oversight.
So you've got this wide net, trying to catch every report, always prioritizing the law. How does this process make sure accountability reaches right up into the leadership itself?
That's a really vital point. The reports have to go up the chain. From the provincial superior, they go to the superior general, the head of the whole congregation, and that report must include a votum.
A votum.
Yeah, it's like an authoritative opinion, a recommendation from the provincial superior. Then ultimately the case goes to the relevant Vatican office, the competent dicastery, like the dicastery for the doctrine of faith, or the one for Institutes of Consecrated Life, depending on the case.
Okay.
But here's a really powerful safeguard built in. Any member is actually obliged to report directly to the superior general if they believe a provincial superior is interfering with an investigation or trying to cover something up.
Wow. That's quite something. Mandating reporting on your own superiors.
It promotes an extraordinary level of potential transparency and accountability right within the hierarchy. And again, critically, none of these internal church procedures are allowed to interfere with civil law obligations, especially mandatory reporting. Civil law comes first.
That commitment to transparency, to following civil law, it certainly sounds robust on paper. But what about actual consequences? If someone is found guilty, what happens? Does the policy ensure accountability leads to real outcomes?
Yes, it clearly outlines serious disciplinary actions. These can include dismissal from ministry altogether, and it notes legal consequences too, depending on the jurisdiction and the findings. This applies across the board: physical, emotional, spiritual, sexual abuse, abuse of conscience, abuse of power.
So real teeth.
Seems so. And these consequences also apply if there's abuse between members of the congregation, especially if there's a power imbalance involved. And it's not just about the abuse itself. Breaching confidentiality during the process is also flagged as a serious offense, potentially facing canon law consequences. They're trying to protect the integrity of the whole process.
And what about the person accused? Is there due process for them?
Indeed. The policy is careful to balance this. It explicitly emphasizes the commitment to the principle of innocent until proven guilty for anyone accused. They are to be provided with care and legal advocacy, and if innocence is ultimately proven, their honors to be restored. It's trying to maintain that crucial balance between robust victim support and a fair process for the accused.
Okay. And finally, how do they make sure this very comprehensive policy doesn't just become, a document that sits on a shelf? How do they keep it alive, relevant, effective?
Good question. They build in continuous commitment to accountability and governance. This happens through required annual self-audits within each unit, and also through periodic external independent audit processes.
External audits, too.
Yes. And the policy document itself is explicitly called a living relevant document. It's scheduled to be formally reviewed and updated every 3 years. So this dedication to ongoing evaluation, to checking if it's actually working, seems fundamental to its long-term effectiveness and making sure it adapts to new challenges.
Right. So we've really dug deep into this congregational policy for safeguarding from the Congregation of Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Just to recap, it's clearly not just comprehensive on paper. It seems deeply rooted in this ethical foundation of human dignity. It lays out very practical, multi-layered steps for both prevention and response, and it mandates clear accountability structures.
It certainly offers a systemic, very multifaceted approach to what is an incredibly complex and deeply sensitive issue. No doubt about that.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, this deep dive really shows how one organization, one with a genuinely global reach and a deeply held mission, is grappling with these really intricate issues of trust, safety, governance in our modern world. It highlights the kind of detailed thinking, the systemic approach that's needed to try and protect the most vulnerable among us. And it shows how faith-based organizations specifically are actively adapting to contemporary challenges, legal frameworks, while striving to uphold their core values.
It really does provide a kind of blueprint, doesn't it, for what a dedicated, thought-through safeguarding policy can look like. But, it makes you wonder, consider this. How are policies like this, even ones this detailed and values-driven, how are they constantly tested? Tested by the human element, by the huge diversity of cultural contexts they operate in.
Yeah, the reality on the ground.
Exactly. What more can we learn about that ongoing challenge, the challenge of translating these high ideals, these comprehensive rules, into consistent real-world practice everywhere, all the time, ensuring that, as they say, every person can flourish, and that they truly uphold this culture of care and dignity they aspire to? Something to think about.